Have you ever heard a story so cruel, so heart-wrenching that it lingers in your chest long after it ends? Listen closely. This is not just a tale. It's a scar burned deep into the soul of a young girl named Gambi. A scar she never deserved. A punishment she bore for something as innocent as brushing her teeth. "How dare you brush your teeth?" Those were the words that shattered her. Words sharper than any slap, heavier than any blow. Gambi was just 13, quiet, soft-eyed, with a heart too gentle for the world. After losing her parents in a car crash, she was sent to live with her aunt, a woman whose smiles were laced with poison. That morning, she had woken early, rinsed her toothbrush, and gently scrubbed her mouth, trying to wash away the heaviness of sleep and sorrow. She just wanted to feel clean. But as her aunt's shadow darkened the doorway, that simple act turned into the beginning of a torment no child should ever face. The slap came before Gambi could even turn around. A loud, jarring strike that sent her crashing into the wall, her toothbrush falling to the floor. Her aunt, Madame Informer, stood tall above her, a storm brewing in her eyes. "Who told you to use my toothpaste?" she thundered, her voice rolling like thunder. "I just wanted my mouth to be clean before school," Gambi whispered, lips trembling, her voice barely a breath. But her aunt's eyes narrowed like shards of broken glass. "Clean? You dare speak of clean, you useless orphan? Your parents left you with nothing, and still you walk around like royalty." Gambi felt her chest tighten, not from the pain of the slap, but from the cruelty in her aunt's voice. The bathroom still smelled faintly of soap, but to her, the air was suffocating. As she reached down to retrieve her toothbrush, her aunt's foot came down hard, smashing it into the wet towel on the floor. "Look at me," Madame Informer growled, her breath hot and heavy with anger. Gambi lifted her swollen face, tears swimming in her eyes. "You don't get to act like a princess here. You use nothing you didn't buy. Even a drop of toothpaste must be earned." Gambi nodded quickly, lips quivering. She wanted to speak, wanted to say she swept the compound every morning, scrubbed the floors, polished her aunt's shoes before school. Wasn't that worth something? But she stayed silent. Her silence only fed the fire. Madame Informer grabbed her roughly by the arm, dragging her outside. Neighbors peeked from windows, drawn by the commotion. The morning sun had barely risen. "Tell them," her aunt screamed. "Tell them how you, a girl with no mother or father, dare to act like the daughter of a rich man, brushing your teeth like you have a right." Gambi stood barefoot on the rough sand, holding the broken toothbrush in her trembling hands as her aunt's voice filled the compound. "From now on, rinse your mouth with water. No more toothpaste. No brushing unless you can buy your own. Maybe then you'll learn your place." Whispers surrounded her. Some neighbors shook their heads, others chuckled. Her cousin Adobe leaned smugly in the doorway, arms crossed, her teeth gleaming from the same toothpaste Gambi had been punished for using. "Maybe if you stopped acting so pathetic, Auntie wouldn't treat you this way," she said, twirling her braid. Gambi said nothing. Her throat felt tight, her chest like stone. At school that day, she avoided speaking too close to anyone, afraid they'd notice her breath. When classmates asked about the swelling on her face, she just smiled weakly and blamed it on sleep. Inside, her heart was breaking. She couldn't understand how something as simple and ordinary as brushing her teeth had turned into a crime. Day after day, the pattern repeated. Gambi rose before dawn, rinsed her mouth with water, fetched buckets, swept the house, and watched as her aunt and cousin laughed in the bathroom, their teeth shining, the scent of mint filling the air. And she would stand there, cupping water in her palms, swishing it around her mouth, pretending it erased the bitterness she carried. At school, the whispers began. Some classmates noticed her shrinking smile, her hesitant words, the way she kept her distance. They started calling her names. "Mouth odor," they'd mutter behind her back. Every word slammed into her like stones, building walls around her spirit. She began sitting at the edge of the classroom, avoiding jokes, avoiding people, slowly fading into the background. Her teachers noticed the change. How the once bright girl now moved like a shadow, her spark dimmed, her lips pressed into silence. Each evening when she returned home and knelt quietly near her aunt, hoping for even a hint of compassion, the words were always the same. "In this house, even cleanliness must be earned." In those moments, Gambi often remembered her mother, her soft hands, the way she'd sit by her bed each night, whispering gently, "No matter how poor we are, always keep yourself clean. Dignity lives in cleanliness." Her mother used to hand her the tiny toothbrush with a smile, dabbing on a bit of paste, laughing as Cambi filled her mouth with bubbles. Now, every time she bent over the basin to rinse her mouth with only water, it felt like she was betraying that memory, letting go of the last piece of her mother's love. At night, when the house fell silent, Cambi lay curled up on the thin mat in the kitchen corner, her arms wrapped around her mother's faded scarf. She closed her eyes tightly, holding on to the memory of soft laughter and clean breath, silently wishing that morning would never come. She would whisper into the silence, "Mama, I'm trying, but it's so hard." And in that quiet darkness, tears slid slowly down her cheeks, soaking into the worn scarf she clutched like a lifeline. The shame was crushing, but even heavier was the grief, the aching absence of her mother's voice, her embrace, her protection. That was the wound that hurt the most. One evening, after another exhausting day of chores, Cambi returned from the stream, arms sore from carrying heavy buckets. As she reached the doorway, she saw her aunt waiting with arms folded tightly, her expression like ice. "Come here," Madame Informer said, her voice cold and sharp like the harmattan wind. Cambi placed the bucket down carefully and stepped forward with her head lowered. Her body ached, but her spirit ached more. "Your teacher came to this house today," Informer said bitterly. "She told me you no longer speak in class, that you sit there like something cursed. Tell me, is that how you plan to shame this family? Are you trying to make people think I mistreat you?" The words pierced not because they were new, but because they revealed what truly mattered to her aunt. Appearances, not truth. "Answer me," Informer snapped, grabbing Cambi's chin and forcing her to look up. "Do you want this community to think I'm a monster because of you?" Cambi quickly shook her head, her eyes burning. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her aunt didn't need Cambi to make her look cruel. Her actions spoke loud enough. That night, as the rest of the house filled with laughter, Madame Informer and her daughter sat in the parlor eating fried plantain, the air thick with cruel delight. Then her aunt called out, her tone laced with mock sweetness. "Cambi, since you want to behave like a princess who brushes her teeth, let's help you remember your place." She held out a bucket filled with ash and salt. "From now on, this is what you'll use to clean your mouth. Let's see how long that pride lasts." Adobe burst into giggles, covering her mouth in exaggerated amusement. "Now your breath will match your new name, Ashmouth Cambi." Cambi took the bucket with trembling fingers. The first time she used the mixture, it burned. The coarse texture tore tiny cuts into her gums, leaving her mouth sore and bleeding. But she didn't cry. Not where anyone could see. Her tears belonged to the quiet corners of night, when only the scurrying of rats filled the silence. Then she'd bury her face into the mat and whisper, "Mama, Papa, why did you leave me here?" Her suffering slowly began to show. Her lips cracked, her smile faded, and at school, the brightness in her eyes dimmed. Some students whispered cruel names, but not all of them laughed. One day during lunch, a quiet classmate named Chica walked up and held out a piece of bread. "Cambi," she said softly, "why don't you smile anymore?" Cambi stared at the bread, throat tight with unspoken emotion. No one had asked her anything so kind in weeks. She forced a tiny smile. "I'm just tired," she murmured. Chica pressed the bread into her hand gently. "My mother says sharing food brings comfort. Maybe this will help." Cambi wanted to speak, to tell her everything about the punishment, the stolen dignity, the reason a simple toothbrush had become a symbol of shame. But the words stayed lodged in her chest like stones. All she could manage was, "Thank you." And she held the bread close, not for hunger, but for the warmth of being seen. But kindness, as rare as it came, couldn't protect her from what followed. One Saturday, Madame Informer discovered a few coins hidden beneath Cambi's mat. Money she had quietly saved from errand change, hoping to one day buy her own toothbrush and a small packet of paste. It was her secret hope, something to call her own. But her aunt's fury exploded like thunder. She stormed into the yard, yanking Cambi along, the coins clenched in her fist. "So now you're stealing from me to feed your pride?" she shouted loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You think you can act like you're grown? Like you can care for yourself under my roof?" Before Cambi could explain, another slap sent her sprawling. Her aunt scattered the coins into the sand and ground them under her heel, her voice still rising. "From this moment, you will not touch money unless I give it to you. Forget about toothbrushes or toothpaste. You will live humble, quiet, and reminded of what you truly are. That night, as silence returned to the compound and the dust settled, Camby sat in the kitchen's dark corner, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her heart throbbed with pain too heavy for a child to bear. Outside, frogs croaked under the moonlight. Inside, she stared at the silver beams streaming through the small window. And then, in the softest voice, she whispered, "Mama, I wish you could come and take me away. Even if it's to heaven. I'm so tired." Her chest trembled as she cried the kind of tears that make no sound, because there was no one left to listen. But as she cried into the quiet night, something shifted inside her. The fear she had carried for weeks began to harden, transforming into a quiet, steady resolve. One day, she whispered, wiping her face with the edge of her sleeve, "I won't live like this. No one will tell me I don't deserve to be clean, to be loved, to be treated like I matter." She didn't know how she would escape her aunt's cruel grip, but for the first time since losing her parents, a small flame lit within her. It was faint, but it warmed her spirit enough to keep her from crumbling. The next morning, as the rooster crowed and the compound slowly stirred awake, Camby rose early and did everything as usual. Sweeping, fetching water, polishing her shoes. But something in her was different. Her movements were calm, steady, but no longer weighed down by silent dread. There was a stillness in her that unsettled Madame Eforma. Over breakfast, her aunt narrowed her eyes. "Why are you so quiet today? Are you planning something?" Camby kept her eyes on the floor and shook her head gently. "No, Auntie. I'm only tired." But inside, her thoughts were loud. She remembered the faces of people who once filled their old home with laughter. People who knew her parents. Were any of them still nearby? Would they remember her? That afternoon, returning from the market, she passed by the small corner shop owned by Mom Nkechi, her mother's closest friend. Just the sight of that familiar warm face almost brought her to her knees. She paused at the doorway, clutching the vegetables in her arms, unsure whether to speak. Fear gripped her. What if her aunt found out? But the hesitation faded as Mom Nkechi looked up and noticed her. Her eyes widened, and her voice softened. "Camby, my dear. Is that you?" She froze. Tears filled her eyes before she could blink them away. Slowly, she turned and answered in a whisper, "Yes, Mama." The older woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her wrapper. She gently cupped Camby's face, turning it toward the sunlight. The bruises, the dryness, the cracked lips. All of it told a story without a word being spoken. "What has she done to you?" Mom Nkechi asked, her voice trembling with sorrow and rising anger. Camby opened her mouth, but her voice caught. She wanted to pour everything out, the salt, the ash, the shame, the humiliation, but fear held her still. Instead, one tear escaped down her cheek as she whispered, "I only brushed my teeth, and everything changed." That was all it took. Mom Nkechi's face stiffened with silent fury, and in that moment, she made a promise to herself. This suffering would not continue. That evening, as Camby returned home, she noticed her aunt speaking in low tones to a neighbor, her eyes cutting sharply in her direction. A cold wave crept up her spine. Her aunt suspected something, even though she had confessed nothing. At dinner, the usual taunts were absent, replaced by a heavy silence that made the air feel dense. Camby ate slowly, forcing the food down despite the tightness in her chest. Adobe, sensing something brewing, snickered beneath her breath. "Ashmouth is about to get another lesson," she muttered. That night, Camby lay awake on her mat, her chest aching from a dread so thick she could hardly breathe. Then, just as her eyes began to close, a soft knock tapped at the kitchen window. Startled, she sat up and crept over to peek outside. There, bathed in moonlight, was Mom Nkechi's face. She held out a small parcel wrapped in cloth and whispered urgently, "Camby, take this. Meet me by the well tomorrow before school. We need to talk." Camby's hands trembled as she reached for the bundle. Her heart pounded with something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Inside the cloth was a brand new toothbrush, a small tube of toothpaste, and a handwritten note. "You are not a burden. You are not unworthy. Clean yourself, child. You deserve it. We will find a way to set you free." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she pressed the note to her chest. That night, for the first time in so long, she smiled. It was faint, fragile, but it reached her heart. Before the sun had risen, before her aunt stirred from her room, Camby quietly slipped into the bathroom and locked the creaky door. Her hands shook as she unwrapped the items, heart pounding. She brushed slowly, carefully. The mint stung her broken gums, burned the small wounds in her mouth, but she didn't stop. The pain felt like healing, like taking back a piece of herself. In that moment, as the foam circled down the drain, Gambi stood a little taller. Not because the world had changed, but because something inside her finally had. She stared at her reflection in the mirror above the sink, her face pale, worn, but her teeth shimmered faintly in the soft light. "Mama," she whispered, "I'm still your Cammy. I haven't forgotten who I am." Gently, she tucked the toothbrush into her pocket and made her way to the well, where Mama Key was already waiting. Camille didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. The chains her aunt had used to hold her down were slowly beginning to break. By the time the first colors of dawn stretched across the sky, she stood at the well, clutching her old school bag with the hidden toothbrush safely buried inside. Mama Key appeared with a firm wrapper around her waist, her face drawn but kind. She opened her arms and pulled the girl close. "Cammy," she said softly, "I won't let that woman destroy you. Your mother, my sister in every way but blood, begged me to protect you before she passed. I kept quiet too long. No more." Camille's voice trembled as she looked up, tears stinging her eyes. "She punishes me for brushing my teeth. Just for wanting to feel clean. She says I'm a disgrace." Mama Key's face tightened with quiet anger. "This isn't about toothpaste, child. Some people carry so much bitterness that they can't stand to see anyone holding on to even a spark of joy. But we won't let her take yours." She pressed some coins into Camille's hand. "Hide this. Keep it safe. We'll plan carefully. But for now, hold your head high. Don't let her see you afraid." For a few days, things remained calm. Camille rose before dawn, brushing her teeth when the house was still asleep. Slowly, a sense of peace returned. At school, her shy smile was no longer forced. Her classmates began to notice the change. But peace inside Madame Afoma's house was never meant to last. One early Saturday morning, as Camille slipped into the bathroom, unaware that Adobe had been watching from the hallway, her quiet ritual came to an end. The moment Camille revealed the toothbrush, Adobe tiptoed back to her mother's room with excitement flickering in her eyes. "Mama," she whispered, "Camille is hiding a new toothbrush again. I saw it." Ifoma's fury exploded like dry grass catching flame. She stormed into the bathroom without a word, kicked the door open, and yanked Camille by her braids. The toothbrush fell to the floor with a clatter, loud and unforgiving. "You dare disobey me?" Ifoma bellowed, her voice shaking the walls. "After I warned you, no brushing, no paste, unless you earn it." She dragged Camille barefoot into the courtyard. The girl trembled as Adobe followed, smiling like it was a game. The shouting drew neighbors once again. Ifoma held up the toothbrush like a stolen prize. "Look at this," she shouted. "An orphan girl sneaking luxury while living under my roof, eating my food, wearing my clothes. Should I not teach her a lesson?" The crowd murmured. Some eyes filled with pity. Others nodded. Before anyone could speak, Ifoma flung the toothbrush into the fire. Camille dropped to her knees, crying out, "Please, that was all I had." Ifoma's face remained unmoved. "You'll learn your place. You own nothing in this house. Not even your breath." Her words hit harder than the slap that followed. Camille's spirit crumbled as if dried under a cruel sun. But just as Ifoma raised her hand again, a sharp voice cut through the air. "That's enough, Ifoma." All eyes turned toward the gate. Mama Key stood tall, anger burning in her gaze as she entered the courtyard. Her presence silenced the crowd. "I've watched you shame this girl for too long," she said, voice steady. "Her mother entrusted her to you, to care for, not destroy." Ifoma folded her arms. "This is my house. You don't get to tell me how to run it." "She steals. She lies. She survives," Mama Key interrupted. Turning to the crowd, she raised her voice. "Is it stealing for a child to want to clean her teeth? Is it a crime to want to feel human?" Voices rippled through the onlookers. Some nodded. Others murmured agreement. Ifoma's confidence flickered under their gaze, but she held her ground. "She's my responsibility," she snapped. "You will not take her." Mama Key stepped closer, locking eyes with her. "Then treat her as the child she is. Not a servant. Not an animal. Or I swear on the memory of her parents, I'll take her away and raise her myself." The courtyard fell into deep silence. Then slowly, one voice from the crowd spoke. "She's just a child." Another added, "Even an orphan should have the right to wash." The people, emboldened, murmured louder. Ifoma stood still, pride twitching behind her eyes, but she said nothing. The tide had begun to turn. "This is wickedness." Ifoma's face tensed, her pride and buried fear twisting silently within her. The tension in the courtyard was thick, like a storm waiting to break. Finally, she spat on the ground and turned her back. "Take her then," she said coldly. "Take your precious little princess. But don't come crying when she suffers. She's no longer my burden." Camille trembled. Her eyes widened as she looked up at Mama Key, who stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her in a firm protective embrace. For the first time in so long, Camille felt something she hadn't dared to believe in: safety. The walk to Mama Key's home felt like crossing from darkness into light. Camille, still clutching her worn school bag, glanced over her shoulder at the compound she was leaving behind. The neighbors still whispered from the shadows, but the house itself looked smaller now, almost insignificant. Yet the fear clung to her, stitched deep beneath her skin. When they arrived, Mama Key knelt and gently held her hand. "You're safe now, Cammy," she whispered. "Your mother would never forgive me if I left you in that place a moment longer." Camille felt something inside her begin to lift. The tightness in her chest eased just slightly. Then, stepping into the small, neat room Mama Key had prepared, she saw a folded blanket, a pillow, and on a wooden table, a brand-new toothbrush and tube of toothpaste waiting quietly. Her knees gave way. She fell and sobbed, every tear carrying months of pain and silence. Mama Key held her close, stroking her back. "Let it all out, my child," she murmured. "But remember, this isn't the end of your story." The days that followed felt like learning to breathe again. Mama Key enrolled her in weekend classes to help her catch up. She made sure Camille ate warm meals and reminded her each day, "You are not a burden. You are a child, and you deserve to be loved." Slowly, Camille's posture changed. Her smile returned, still touched by pain but real. And though she now lived in safety, the scars remained. Not just on her skin, but buried in her memories. Each morning, as she brushed her teeth, she'd pause and stare at herself in the mirror. "How could something so small make me feel so worthless?" she often whispered. Mama Key would sometimes hear her and gently reply from the doorway, "Because it was never really about the toothbrush, Camille. It was about power. Some people can't bear to see another carry even a shred of dignity when they themselves are filled with bitterness. But you must not let their darkness decide who you are. Your light is still yours." Those words became her anchor. Months passed. Camille returned to school, not as the timid girl hiding at the back of the class, but as someone who was healing. Her classmates were stunned. Her uniform was neat, her smile steady, her voice clear. Chica, the classmate who had once shared her lunch, hugged her tightly. "You're back," she whispered. Camille smiled softly. "I never really left. I just needed to remember who I was." The whispers about her time with her aunt didn't stop. But they no longer weighed her down. One afternoon, during an assembly, the principal called her name. She had earned a scholarship for academic excellence. As she stepped forward to receive the certificate, Camille heard her mother's voice in her heart. "Always keep yourself clean, Camille. No matter how poor we are, that's something no one can take from you." Tears welled in her eyes as the applause rang through the hall. Her aunt had tried to break her spirit, but instead, she had only helped Camille understand her own strength. News of the scholarship reached Madame Ifoma through gossip and murmurs. At first she scoffed. "Let her enjoy the spotlight," she muttered. "She'll fall like her parents did." But late at night, when Adobe was asleep and the house was quiet, Ifoma would sit alone in her parlor, staring at the empty space where Camille used to kneel and polish her shoes. A strange weight pressed on her chest, not regret, not love, something colder. A silence filled with the memory of being looked at with hope and trust, and how she had crushed it. She poured herself a drink, her hand shaking slightly. "All this, over a toothbrush," she murmured. But her pride, old and bitter, swallowed the rest. She would never admit her cruelty, never say she was wrong. Years passed. Life turned its wheel. The once feared Madame Ifoma grew frail as illness took hold. Doctors called it relentless. Her strength faded, her voice softened, and the wealth she had clung to slipped away in hospital fees. The woman who once ruled her home with iron cruelty was now silent in a bed, bones aching, breath thin. But the sharpest pain wasn't in her body. It was in her daughter. Adobe, once spoiled and protected from all hardship, visited rarely. When she did, her eyes were cold, her voice dismissive. "Mama, I'm busy," she'd say, barely looking up from her phone. "You have nurses. What else do you need?" Ifoma would turn to the wall, her loneliness heavier than her sickness. She had never taught her daughter kindness, and now it wasn't there to be returned. The money in her account meant nothing. It couldn't buy love, or soften the quiet that surrounded her. One quiet evening, a familiar hand slipped into hers. She turned slowly and saw Camille, no longer the frightened girl she had tormented, but a grown woman steady and kind. "Why are you here?" Ifoma asked, voice brittle. "After everything I did, why?" Camille's voice shook as she answered, "Because when my parents died, you were the only family I had. And no matter what, no one deserves to face the end alone." Ifoma's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't allowed herself to cry in years. "I'm sorry, Camille. For everything." Camille squeezed her hand gently. "You're forgiven, Auntie." That night, Ifoma fell asleep with a peace she hadn't known in decades. Weeks later she passed with Camille by her side, the same girl she once humiliated over a toothbrush, now the only one to show her what grace truly meant. The lesson is simple, but eternal. Life humbles even the proud. Madame Ifoma's wealth couldn't save her, nor buy her love. The daughter she raised without compassion left her cold and alone. But the orphan she had beaten and shamed turned out to be the only soul who came back, with kindness instead of anger. So remember, treat every soul with love, no matter how small. The compassion you offer today may be the hand that holds you when life's shadows fall. If this story moved you, share it. Let its message reach others. And don't forget to subscribe to Endless Folktales, for stories that heal, teach, and stay with you.